It was my 78th birthday, and I decided to celebrate alone at an elegant downtown restaurant.
When I arrived, they yelled, "Get out, useless grandma," and pushed me toward the door. The other customers laughed while I struggled to maintain my dignity.
Then the president stood up, took my hands, and said, "This lady saved my son in Vietnam." The restaurant fell into absolute silence.
Chapter 1. The Forgotten Nurse. My name is Maria Elena Vasquez. I'm 78 years old, and for decades I thought my story had been completely forgotten. But there are moments in life when destiny decides to remind the world who you really were, and that moment came in the most unexpected place. An elegant restaurant where they humiliated me to tears. It all began on my 78th birthday, a rainy Tuesday in November that I had marked on my calendar with a small red heart. Not because I expected gifts or celebrations. My children live far away and my grandchildren barely remember me, but because I had decided to do something special for myself for the first time in years. I lived alone in a small apartment downtown, in a building that had seen better days. My retired nurse's pension barely covered the basics, but for 8 months I had been saving every penny I could. $5 here, 10 there, sometimes just the coins I found in the pockets of my old coats. My goal was simple but meaningful: to dine at Le Bernardin, the most elegant restaurant in the city, the same place where I had worked as an emergency nurse during the riots of 1968. Why that specific restaurant? Because it had been built on the land where once stood the temporary military hospital that saved hundreds of lives during the Vietnam War. I had worked there for 3 intense years, from 1970 to 1973, treating wounded soldiers who arrived in military helicopters every hour of the day and night. That morning of my birthday, I woke up early, as I had done all my life. At 5 in the morning, I was already awake, preparing my black coffee and looking out the window at the empty street. There was something nostalgic about those silent hours that reminded me of my night shifts at the hospital, when the world seemed to stop, except for the constant hum of machines keeping our boys alive. I dressed in my best clothes, a blue floral dress I had bought 5 years ago for my husband's funeral. Black shoes I polished until I could see my reflection, and the fake pearl necklace my mother had given me when I graduated from nursing school in 1965. It wasn't elegant clothing by modern standards, but it was the best I had. Throughout the day, while doing my routine activities, cleaning my small apartment, checking my medications, watching the news, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I hadn't eaten at an elegant restaurant in over a decade. My husband Eduardo and I used to celebrate our anniversaries at nice places, but after he died 10 years ago, those experiences became impossible luxuries. At 6 in the evening, I put on my grey wool coat, the same one I had worn for 15 winters, and took the bus downtown. During the 30-minute journey, I checked my small purse over and over again, counting the bills I had saved. $250. It was more money than I had had together in years, and it was all destined for this special dinner. Le Bernardin was located in the financial district, surrounded by skyscrapers and corporate offices. When the bus dropped me off at the corner, I could see the bright lights of the restaurant through its huge windows. Elegant couples entered and left. Men in expensive suits and women in dresses that probably cost more than my rent for 3 months. For a moment, standing on the sidewalk, I hesitated. What was an old retired nurse doing in a place like that? Who was I to pretend I belonged to that world of luxury and sophistication? But then I remembered why I had chosen that place. It wasn't just a restaurant for me, it was a symbol. under those elegant foundations and those bright lights, there had existed the emergency rooms where I had saved lives, where I had held the hands of 18-year-old boys who cried for their mothers, where I had worked 16-hour shifts without rest because every minute meant the difference between life and death. I breathed deeply the cold November air and walked toward the entrance. The restaurant was even more impressive inside. High ceilings with crystal chandeliers, tables covered with immaculate white tablecloths, and the kind of reverent silence that only exists in places where a glass of wine costs more than my weekly food budget. The aroma of gourmet food floated in the air, mixing with expensive perfume and the subtle smoke of scented candles. I approached the hostess podium, a young woman of perhaps 25, impeccably dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than all my savings. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed painted on her face. "Good evening," I said with my best smile, trying to hide my nervousness. "I have a reservation for one person under the name Vasquez." The hostess looked me up and down with an expression that immediately made me feel out of place. Her eyes stopped at my simple dress, my old but shiny shoes, my worn coat. It was a quick but cruel evaluation, the kind of look that says, "You don't belong here," without uttering a single word. "Vasquez?" she repeated, checking her list with deliberately slow movements. "I don't see any reservation under that name." "I called this morning," I explained, feeling my confidence begin to crumble. "I spoke with someone named James. He confirmed a table for 7. "I'm sorry, but there's no reservation," she said with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And besides, this restaurant has a strict dress code. I'm afraid your attire doesn't meet our standards." The words hit me like a physical slap. My attire. The clothing I had chosen carefully, that I had ironed so painstakingly, that represented the best I had. "But I have money," I whispered, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. "I can pay." "Ma'am, it's not a matter of money," the hostess responded, raising her voice enough so that nearby tables could hear. "It's a matter of maintaining certain standards. I'm sure there are many places more appropriate for someone like you." "Someone like you," the words echoed in my ears like a cruel echo. That's when I heard the first giggle. A young man at a nearby table, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my annual rent, leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. Their eyes were fixed on me, and there was no doubt that I was the object of their amusement. "Look at the grandma," said another customer from a corner table, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to humiliating others for entertainment. "Did someone tell her this isn't a soup kitchen?" The laughter spread like ripples in a pond. They weren't open guffaws, but those socially acceptable giggles that wealthy people use to mock those they consider inferior, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than any direct insult. "Please." I tried once more, addressing the hostess with what dignity I had left. "I just want to dine. It's my birthday." "Her birthday," repeated a man from another table, clearly having heard my plea. "How touching! Did someone bring a candle for Grandma's cake?" More laughter, this time louder, crueler. I felt tears forming in my eyes, but I held them back. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. During my years as a nurse, I had faced horrible medical emergencies, had consoled devastated families, had worked under pressure that would have broken weaker people. I wasn't going to allow these privileged strangers to see me break. But then the hostess did something that crossed a line I didn't know existed. She touched me. She put her hand on my arm and began to push me gently but firmly toward the door. "You really need to leave," she said in a low but firm voice. "You're making our other customers uncomfortable." The physical contact, the pressure of her hand pushing me like I was an object in the way, broke something inside me. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was the complete lack of respect for my basic humanity. "Get out, useless grandma!" shouted the same young man who had started the mockery, apparently emboldened by the hostess's behavior. "This place is for people who matter." The phrase hit me like a physical fist. People who matter. As if my 78 years of life, my service as a nurse, my dedication to saving lives meant nothing. As if I were invisible, disposable, a nuisance that had to be removed. At this moment of absolute humiliation, when Maria Elena finds herself being pushed toward the door while strangers laugh at her pain, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about an elderly woman being mistreated. It's about how our society treats our elders, about how we judge a person's value by their appearance. How many times have we witnessed similar situations and not intervened? Comment below if you've ever seen something like this. And please share this story because we need to talk about these issues. Subscribe if you want to know how this story takes a turn nobody expected, because what's about to happen will change everything. The hostess continued pushing me toward the door, while the customers' laughter created a cruel soundtrack for my humiliation. Each step toward the exit felt like a defeat, as if I were being expelled not just from the restaurant, but from society itself. But then, just as the hostess was about to reach the door, something extraordinary happened. A man stood up from a table in the most exclusive corner of the restaurant. He wasn't just any man. He was distinguished, about 60 years old, with perfectly combed silver hair and a suit that screamed power and authority. He had been dining quietly with a small group of people who, by their suits and behavior, were clearly important figures. "Excuse me," he said with a voice that carried the weight of natural command. "What's happening here?" The hostess immediately stopped, releasing my arm as if it burned. "Sir, this lady doesn't meet our standards and—" "Standards?" The man repeated the word as if it had a bad taste. He approached us with measured steps, and I could see that the entire restaurant had fallen silent. The laughter had stopped abruptly. When he was in front of me, he looked directly into my eyes. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that seemed vaguely familiar, although I was sure I had never seen him before. "Could you tell me your name, ma'am?" he asked with genuine respect. "Maria Elena Vasquez," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes lit up with immediate recognition. "Maria Elena Vasquez," he repeated slowly. "Nurse Maria Elena Vasquez?" I nodded, confused by his reaction. What happened next was like a movie scene, except it was completely real. The man, who I now realized had the kind of presence that only comes with real power, came closer to me. His eyes had filled with tears. "Mrs. Vasquez," he said, his voice now trembling slightly, "you don't know me, but I know you. I've been looking for you for almost 50 years. The entire restaurant was now in complete silence. I could hear my own heart beating. In 1970, he continued, taking my wrinkled hands in his, You saved the life of a 19-year-old soldier who arrived at the military hospital with shrapnel wounds to his chest and abdomen. They told his family he had no chance of surviving. My mind began to race, trying to process what I was hearing. That soldier, he said, now with tears running down his cheeks, was my son, my eldest son, James. The world stopped. You worked on him for 11 straight hours, he continued. When other doctors and nurses gave up, you refused to let him go. You kept him stable, gave him blood transfusions from your own arm when the supply ran out, and literally breathed life back into his lungs when his breathing stopped 3 times. The memories began returning like an avalanche. 1,971. The military hospital. A young soldier with a destroyed chest. I had worked on many similar cases, but this one had been special because he had fought so desperately to live. James Morrison, I whispered, the name emerging from some deep place in my memory. Yes, said the man, smiling through his tears. James Morrison. My son, James Morrison. And then I understood who the man in front of me was. Mrs. Vasquez, he said, raising his voice so the entire restaurant could hear clearly. My name is Robert Morrison. I am the President of the United States. And this lady, he continued, turning to the silent audience, this extraordinary lady saved my son's life more than 50 years ago. If the previous silence had been complete, now it was sepulchral. I could have heard a pin drop. My son James is alive today because this nurse, this incredible woman whom you were humiliating, refused to give up. He became a doctor because of her inspiration. He married, had children, saved hundreds of lives himself, all because Maria Elena Vasquez decided his life was worth saving. The president turned to the hostess, who was paralyzed with shock. Standards, he asked, his voice now carrying an edge of presidential authority. Are you telling me this heroine doesn't meet your standards? The hostess couldn't speak. No one in the restaurant could speak. Let me explain something about standards, the president continued. Real standards aren't measured by the clothes you wear or the money you have. They're measured by the lives you touch, the service you give, the sacrifice you make for others. He turned to the customers who had been laughing at me. This woman, he said, his voice filling every corner of the restaurant, worked 16-hour shifts for 3 years in a military hospital, earning less in a year than some of you spend in a weekend. She had no days off, no vacations, no luxuries. She had a mission: to keep our soldiers alive so they could return home to their families. The young man who had shouted, "Useless grandma," now looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. While you were at privileged universities or starting comfortable careers, the president continued, Maria Elena Vasquez was carrying wounded soldiers, comforting the dying, and performing medical miracles with limited equipment and scarce resources. He turned to me again, and I could see pride and gratitude shining in his eyes. Mrs. Vasquez, I don't just owe you my son's life. I owe you the lives of my grandchildren, who exist because my son survived. I owe you decades of family Christmases, graduations, weddings, all the precious moments of family shares that would have been impossible without your dedication. Now tears were running freely down my face. After so many years of feeling invisible, forgotten, unimportant, standing in front of the President of the United States, hearing him honor my service was overwhelming. For 50 years, he continued, I've been trying to find you. James told me about the nurse who refused to let him die, but the military hospital records were lost in a fire. We've searched databases, nursing records, medical associations. We never lost hope of finding you. He took my hands again, and here you are, on your 78th birthday, being treated with this disrespect by people who don't have a fraction of your worth or dignity. The president turned to the entire restaurant. I want all of you to know something. This woman is an American heroine. She has saved more lives than most of us could save in 10 lifetimes. She deserves our respect, our honor, and our gratitude. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the hostess and the restaurant manager, who had appeared quickly when he realized the president was in his establishment. I want you to know, he said with clear authority, that the behavior I witnessed here tonight is unacceptable. A war heroine, a woman who dedicated her life to service, was humiliated in your establishment for the crime of not looking rich enough for you. The manager was visibly trembling. Mr. President, he stammered, this is terrible. A misunderstanding, we never. It wasn't a misunderstanding, the president interrupted. It was pure and simple discrimination. It was cruelty toward an elderly woman based on her economic appearance. He turned to the silent audience once more. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, I'm pleased to present a true American heroine, Nurse Maria Elena Vasquez, who saved countless lives during the Vietnam War and who deserves more respect than any of us could ever give her. And then something magical happened. The president began to applaud. Slowly, one by one, the people in the restaurant stood up. The same customers who had been laughing at me minutes before were now applauding. The hostess who had pushed me toward the door had tears in her eyes. The young man who had called me useless grandma was applauding louder than anyone, clearly ashamed of his previous behavior. The applause grew and grew until the entire restaurant resonated with the sound. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition, respect, and a collective apology for how I had been treated. I stood there, overwhelmed by emotion, while an entire room full of strangers honored me for service I had performed more than half a century ago and that I thought had been forgotten. The president waited for the applause to calm down before speaking again. Mrs. Vasquez, he said, would you do me the honor of being my guest for dinner tonight? I have so many things to ask you, so many stories my son would want you to know. But, I whispered, still overwhelmed, I don't have a reservation. And my clothes. Your clothes? Said the president with a smile. Are perfect. They're the clothes of a woman who worked honestly all her life, who served her country, and who deserves the best treatment this establishment can offer. He turned to the manager. I imagine the best table in the house is available for Mrs. Vasquez? Of course, Mr. President, exclaimed the manager. The best table, the best service, everything courtesy of the house. What followed was the most extraordinary dinner of my life. The president sat with me at a private table, and for the next 3 hours he told me stories about his son James. He showed me photos on his phone. James graduating from medical school, James at his wedding, James with his own children, my medical grandchildren, as the president joked. He told me how James had become a trauma surgeon, inspired by the nurses and doctors who had saved him in Vietnam, how he had spent his career giving back, saving lives in emergency rooms around the country. He talks about you all the time, the president told me. He says Nurse Maria Elena taught him that every life is worth fighting for, no matter the odds. He also told me about his own political career, how his family's experiences with the military medical system had inspired him to fight for better benefits for veterans and medical personnel. It all started with you, he told me. Your dedication to my son showed me the kind of person who really matters in this world. During dinner, several restaurant staff members came to apologize. The hostess came to our table with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Vasquez, she said, I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I have no excuse. It was horrible and unforgivable. I forgave her immediately. She was young, and we all make mistakes when we're young. The important thing was that she had learned something that night. Even some of the customers approached. The young man who had called me useless grandma came to the table with his girlfriend. Ma'am, he said, clearly struggling with his emotions, I'm so sorry for what I said. It was cruel and unnecessary. My own grandfather served in Vietnam, and if someone had treated my grandmother that way, I have no words to apologize. We all deserve second chances, I told him. The important thing is that we learn from our mistakes. At the end of the night, the president walked me to my bus. He insisted on giving me his personal number and invited me to visit him in Washington. James is coming from California next week, he told me. He wants to meet you again, as the adult man he is now, thanks to you. As the bus pulled away, I saw the President of the United States standing on the sidewalk, waving goodbye to an elderly retired nurse. It was an image I knew I would remember for the rest of my life. That night, sitting in my small apartment, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had started the day feeling invisible, forgotten, unimportant. I had been humiliated and pushed toward a door by people who judged me by my appearance. But I had ended up being honored by the president, recognized for my service, and reminded that the things I had done in my life really mattered. Sometimes we think our actions don't have long-term consequences, that the work we do, the service we give, the lives we touch are forgotten with time. But that night, I learned that nothing we do with love and dedication is ever truly lost. Every life I had saved in that military hospital had had a ripple effect. Every soldier who had returned home had had children, had impacted other lives, had made contributions to the world that wouldn't have been possible without surviving. And I had been part of that chain of life, that connection of humanity that extends through generations. 3 days later, I received a call that would change my life once more. It was James, the soldier I had saved, now Dr. James Morrison. Nurse Maria Elena, he said with a voice full of emotion, I've been waiting 50 years to be able to say thank you. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his life, his career, his family. He told me he had named his daughter Elena in my honor. He invited me to his home in California to meet the family whose existence I had made possible. A week later, I was on a plane to California, my first flight in 30 years, paid for by the Morrison family. They received me at the airport as if I were a celebrity, with banners and flowers. I met Elena Morrison, my namesake, now a 30-year-old emergency room doctor. I met the president's grandchildren, who called me Grandma Maria Elena from the first moment. I saw photos of all the lives James had saved during his medical career. All of this exists because of you. James told me as we looked through family albums. Every happy moment, every achievement, every life in these photos exists because a nurse in Vietnam refused to give up. But perhaps the most significant moment came at the end of my visit. James took me to the hospital where he worked and showed me a plaque on the emergency room wall. In honor of Nurse Maria Elena Vasquez, it read, who taught us that every life is worth fighting for. This plaque has been here for 20 years, James explained. Every doctor and nurse who works in this hospital knows your story. You've inspired hundreds of medical professionals who have never met you. I returned home changed, not just by the recognition or temporary fame, but by finally understanding that my life had had meaning, that the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the physical and emotional exhaustion, it had all been worth it. Now, months after that night at the restaurant, I received letters from Vietnam veterans and their families. Some are from people who remembered a nurse named Maria Elena who had cared for them. Others are from families whose loved ones had mentioned my name before dying. Each letter is a reminder that we never know the complete impact of our actions, that a moment of kindness, an act of service, a decision not to give up, can change not just one life, but entire generations. Le Bernardin restaurant now has a table permanently reserved for me. I go there once a month, and each time the staff treats me like royalty. But more importantly, they now have a strict policy against discrimination based on economic appearance. The hostess who pushed me toward the door that night now volunteers at a veterans center on weekends. She wrote me a long letter explaining how that night changed her perspective on human value and dignity. The young man, who called me useless grandma, started a program at his company to honor veterans and healthcare workers. His grandmother, he told me in a letter, had been a nurse during World War II. And he had never really understood the sacrifice that implied until that night. Sometimes the universe teaches us lessons in ways we never expect. My public humiliation became public recognition. My lowest moment became my highest moment. And all because destiny put the President of the United States in the same restaurant at the exact moment when I needed him most. But the real lesson isn't about coincidences or destiny. It's about the importance of remembering that every person has a story. That the elderly woman on the bus, the homeless veteran on the corner, the cleaning lady in your office, they all have stories of service, sacrifice, and contribution that deserve respect. We never know who we're looking at when we judge someone by their appearance. We never know what heroic acts they've performed, what lives they've saved, what differences they've made in the world. This story isn't really about me. It's about all the Maria Elenas of the world, the elderly people who are ignored, looked down upon, and treated as invisible by a society that values youth and wealth over experience and service. It's a reminder that we all deserve dignity, respect, and recognition for the contributions we've made. It's a call to look beyond the surface and see the inherent value in every human being. Because at the end of the day, we're not remembered for the clothes we wear or the money we have. We're remembered for the lives we touch, the love we give, and the service we provide to others. That night at Le Bernardin taught me that it's never too late to be recognized, that our good actions are never really lost. They just wait for the right moment to be remembered and honored. Now, when I walk through the streets of my city, people recognize me, not as the invisible old woman I used to be, but as the heroine nurse who was on national news. Children wave at me, veterans thank me, and other nurses hug me with tears in their eyes. But most importantly, I now understand that I was always valuable, long before the President recognized me. My value didn't come from his validation. It came from the decisions I made every day during my years of service. It came from every time I chose compassion over comfort, service over selfishness, hope over despair. Last month, I spoke at a nursing school. I told those young students that every patient they care for could be someone important's son or daughter. But more importantly, that every patient is important, no matter who they are or where they come from. Don't care for people because they might be famous or powerful, I told them. Care for people because they're human, and that's enough. I also began visiting nursing homes in my area. There are so many elderly men and women who, like me, feel forgotten and invisible. I tell them my story not to boast, but to remind them that their own stories matter too. Every elderly person I meet has extraordinary stories. Mr. Johnson, who worked for 40 years as a teacher in the inner city, educating thousands of children. Mrs. Garcia, who raised 6 children as a single mother while working 2 jobs. Mr. Kim, who came to America without speaking English and built a successful business that employed dozens of families. These are all heroic stories. All these people deserve to be seen, heard, and honored. My experience at the restaurant has become something bigger than myself. The president established a foundation called Forgotten Heroes that identifies and honors elderly people who have made significant but unrecognized contributions to their communities. Every month, we honor a new person. Last month, it was a Korean War veteran who had saved his entire platoon. This month, it's a woman who ran an underground school for African American children during segregation. The foundation also worked with restaurant chains to create policies against age and economic appearance discrimination. Now, there are trainings for staff on how to treat all customers with dignity and respect. But perhaps the most significant change has been personal. For decades after retiring, I felt like my useful life was over, like I had nothing more to offer the world. That night at the restaurant showed me I was wrong. It showed me that my story, my experience, and my wisdom still have value, that I can still make a difference, just in different ways than when I was young. Now I regularly give lectures about wartime service. I volunteer at free clinics, using the skills I developed decades ago. I write letters to deployed soldiers, telling them that someone at home remembers and appreciates their service. I've also reconnected with other Vietnam nurses. Through the publicity from my story, dozens of women who served with me got in touch. Now we have monthly meetings, sharing stories and supporting each other. Many of them have faced the same experiences I have, feeling forgotten and invisible after lives of service. But together, we're reclaiming our place in history. We're making sure the contributions of military nurses are remembered and honoured. James Morrison and I now maintain regular contact. He calls me every Sunday and we've developed a true friendship. He tells me about his patients, without violating confidentiality, of course, and I tell him about my volunteer activities. "You're still saving lives," he told me last week, "just in different ways now." His grandchildren write me adorable letters, calling me Great Grandma Maria Elena. They're learning Spanish to be able to speak with me better. The oldest, Sophia, wants to be a nurse like me. "I want to help people like you did," she wrote in her last letter. "I want to be brave like you." Brave. It's funny how children see things. At the time, caring for wounded soldiers in Vietnam, I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified most of the time. But I did the work anyway, because someone had to do it. Maybe that's what real courage is. Not the absence of fear, but doing the right thing despite the fear. The story of that night also changed President Morrison. In his recent speeches, he has talked about the importance of honouring our elders and recognising the contributions of essential service workers. "I met a nurse," he says in his speeches, who reminded me that true value isn't measured in dollars or status, but in service and sacrifice. He has proposed legislation to improve benefits for retired veterans and healthcare workers. He says my story opened his eyes to how many people like me are struggling financially after lives dedicated to public service. The impact has gone beyond politics too. I receive messages from people across the country who have changed how they treat elderly people after hearing my story. A young woman wrote to me about how she now talks to her grandmother every week, asking her about her life and experiences. A restaurant manager implemented new training policies after seeing my television interview. A college student started a program on his campus to connect students with elderly veterans in the community. Your story made me realize how much wisdom and history we're losing by ignoring our elders, he wrote to me. These messages mean more to me than any official recognition. Knowing that my experience has inspired others to treat elderly people with more respect and dignity, that's what really matters. Now, when I go to Le Bernardin for my monthly dinner, it's not just a meal, it's a celebration of human dignity. It's a reminder that we all deserve respect, no matter how we look or how much money we have. The table where I now sit, the best table in the house, has a small discreet plaque that says Table of Honor. The manager told me they reserve it for people who have made significant contributions to their community. You were the first, he told me, but you won't be the last. We want to honor more forgotten heroes. It's strange how life works. That night began as the worst humiliation of my life and became my proudest moment. It reminded me that our stories don't end until we end, that it's never too late to be recognized, to make a difference, to touch lives. At 78, I've begun a new chapter. I'm no longer just Maria Elena Vasquez, the retired nurse who lives alone in a small apartment. I'm Maria Elena Vasquez, advocate for the elderly, reminder of forgotten stories, voice for those who have been silenced by age. My mission now is to make sure no other elderly person has to face the humiliation I faced that night, that all the Maria Elenas of the world are seen, heard, and honored for their contributions. Because we all have value. We all have stories that matter, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter how old we are or how we look. That's the lesson I learned on my 78th birthday, in an elegant restaurant where I was pushed toward the door like trash and ended up being honored as a heroine. Life has a funny way of reminding us who we really are, just when we need it most. And I am Maria Elena Vasquez, nurse, heroine, and reminder that every life has value, no matter what. That night changed everything. Not just for me, but for all the people whose lives I touched, directly and indirectly, through my story. And that, in the end, is what really matters. Not the moments of humiliation, but the moments of triumph. Not the times we were pushed down, but the times we got up. Not the times we were forgotten, but the times we were remembered. My story continues. At 78, I'm writing new chapters, creating new memories, and touching new lives. And I never again allowed anyone to make me feel invisible. Because now I know what I should have always known. I am visible, I am valuable, and I am unforgettable. And each of you is too.